We have like an all year round subsistence lifestyle. And for most of us, that is the way to survive on our land and work with our land. So when you're telling a child that their education is the most important thing, you have to remember that that education that they're learning of their own land and their own environment is the most important thing.
Other ways have been prioritized. Our people need to believe again that we have something valuable.
I never heard English until I was 6 years old. That's the year I started school. The first English words I remember are, "Who is your name?" I never forget that. Because I answered, I looked around, "Kanok pa nga?" He said, somebody said, "Atkin tayo, say your name." They said, "Aniksak." So she grabbed my hand and hit me with a ruler. And boy, I started crying, and we don't speak that language here. That was my introduction to English. That was my introduction to BI school and how they treated kids. Atira anaksok, utkaraving ni aningaronga, agalan inyukto karirong nunami. My English name is Ronald Brower Sr. I was raised at Iviksuk, about 30 miles south of Barrow. We had a little community. There's 25 of us living in about 6 sod homes. People call us Arctic Slope Inupiaq. But our real title is Sila Leneramut Inuit. We walked to Barrow in 1954. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, they required everybody to come from the villages to go to the communities where they built schools. People from all the region all migrated because we were forced to relocate to the community. And that's when my whole life changed. BI schools were enforced by the federal government to assimilate Alaska Natives. Your kids aren't going to school at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They will be taken away and given to somebody who will make sure that they will go to school.
After breakfast, time to go to school. Even Eskimo children hate to be tardy. The first thing is the oath of allegiance to the United States.
We're expected to behave like Americans. Well, we didn't know who those Americans were. We never heard of them before.
And the only culture that they wanted to project and teach you was the American system in American language, English. My name's Gordon Brower. My Injbastinat is Ikayok. And there's a long story behind that, too. If you want to hear that, you'll have to make a pot of coffee.
Uvanga atira iekpak, nurving mi ngurunga. Mani kobak mi inyu nakto me epavak, nanat kutni savaklunga. Ariga. My name is Gladys Iekpak Pangawi. I live here in Kotzebue, Alaska. I was born and raised in Norvik. You grew up in a community. You knew everybody. Subsistence was a main activity.
Back then, if you graduate from grade school, people had to go to boarding schools.
I think I was 13 or 14, maybe. My whole class, we all went to Wrangell.
Wrangell Institute, Maunachkum, Chimawa, and Chilocco were part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding school system. It was a common practice to provide names or numbers to students because the Western folks didn't know how to say Inupiaq words. When I went to Wrangell, I was identified with a number. I was number 71. all of my possessions were marked with that number. So I was known as 71.
There were real little ones too.
6 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old. The older one of us ended up taking care of all these younger ones.
And my sister went to Wrangell also. They had to help take care of those little kids. You know, they'd get them up and dress them up and make sure they go to school. I remember all of us, getting homesick. We're just not that old. When we went to bed at night, when we first got there, maybe the first couple weeks, of course, everybody had to go to bed the same time and lights out, and we'd hear sniffle. When we did that, a lot of people would start crying. We hear a little sniffle and it would start it up. We'd be crying because we're homesick.
Every night, it was like listening to a choir of kids crying. And it was like a choir every night. Kids wanting to go home. Some kids we just never saw again. We don't know. People we knew, we never saw them again. We don't know what happened.
From there, I was sent to Chimawa, and we didn't have a choice where we went, or maybe we did, and I didn't know, and I didn't ask, and I just went to where they sent me. I think I ended up with a good group of kids. My years of going to school there, they were okay for me, Other people may not have experienced the same thing.
My aka, she actually had a story of a guard that would walk around the school at night, and they would put a string down and he would tie a little candy bar to it, and they'd be able to have a little snack at night. And that was one thing that they looked forward to. She was gone from when she was 14 all the way to 20. So when she came back, she knew that she did not learn a lot of her cultural activities. And she kind of got a broken heart from that. She told me that story because she can understand this feeling that they had, and some people can't really put their finger on it. And it's that disassociation from their culture.
You lose a lot when you're sent away somewhere when you're little. You lose a big chunk of your life. There's gaps in some of the areas of my life because I wasn't here to learn certain things.
My parents were definitely scared for teaching us Inupiat. My parents didn't want us to be abused. It can't be just a light switch you turn on like, oh, okay, everything's good now. The dynamics haven't changed. We're still calling them teachers. They're still coming from out of town. They're not faces we recognize, but then they definitely don't stay.
I think that trauma that was endured during the boarding school era is hugely significant today. You folks seen the recent news, more unmarked graves, right? And so folks are thinking Canada, and that it didn't occur like that in the United States, which is a false narrative, right? It did occur, and it occurred in Alaska, and that's scary, right?
I really understand now that the abuse that they went through. I'm sorry. I didn't think I was gonna cry, but I'm pretty sure I would have learned a lot more if that abuse wasn't there. I would have learned a lot more of my own culture if it wasn't there. And it doesn't really hurt me as much, but my future, my children, my grandchildren, my future grandchildren.
There was an absolute disruption in the way we lived.
And now we have to follow the state programs, state protocols.
And then where do we fit in? We survived this way for 4,000 years, and it worked.
We are the experts of our own people.
We have experienced what we know is good for our indigenous people. Children are usually taught early on how to help their families with hunting and fishing and camping. That education is also very important to them and their families because it is a main food source for a lot of people. Anywhere from 50 to 90% of the food that is eaten is harvested from our land.
I grew up in a whaling family and a subsistence family. There's certain parts of the year we don't prioritize Western education, where subsistence hunting is our priority. We create the school calendar, and oftentimes you will not see a lot of children in school because we are subsisting, and that's important. That's important for our kiddos. That's the education I want my kids to have.
Culture here is centered around subsistence, and once you go subsistent hunting, it's really hard to catch up on work because typically a student will be out for about 10 days. You go out, you harvest, you come back, and you still gotta maintain all that meat and all that stuff that you just caught, and that takes time and that takes energy. You have to be there to learn subsistence. You can't be out of it. You can't read it in a book, because everything you're doing in subsistence, you're doing it with your hands. You need to get the muscle memory down. There's so much like maintenance that you have to learn as a kid growing up in a subsistence lifestyle.
With a different culture coming in and basically doing a takeover in the way that we do things, we can see that reflected down in the generations that are, in school now. We know that when we walk into maybe a school building or, a setting where there are mostly people from outside running the show, that what we have to share might not be of value.
I had grown up Eskimo dancing. I grew up dancing. I vividly remember, I was in first grade. We have this marching song, and it's you march out of the cave or whatever. And I remember we're just walking, and my body just did it because I had learned it over the summer. And I remember getting scolded because we were in a single file line, and I just was moving my arms around. I just remember feeling this way at school that I had to take away my Native identity. And then when I grew up and got older in middle school and high school, and I kind of had more, awareness over kind of who I am, that kind of led into hanging out with a more non-Native group. And that was when the teachers built a stronger relationship with me because I was with Natives less. The school system was built to make a separation. I didn't have a cultural and Native identity at the school.
It's a lot of time and energy to learn the subsistence and the Western side of things, and to work with both of those in your hands and still excel over here and excel over here. Trying to balance the two is a really tricky thing. Every person just wants to be connected.
I can tell you a story about my brother Samuel. He's been a hunter his whole life. He caught his first tutu when he was 6 years old, and he's been cutting those animals up, butchering them, and learning all the body parts. But when he was in high school, he was failing science. When I started talking to him about a tutu, He could tell me all about the ligaments and the bones and tendons and everything, and he could describe it very specifically about the muscle groups that go wrapping around the bone, and he's like, you know. I'm like, no, I don't know. That's just one example where he's being told he's a failure, but he could be a scientist.
Education must take into account hunting cultures, gathering cultures, and show what's the mathematics like of catching a whale. What's the stories associated to whales? How do you benefit nutritionally from the whale? You got math, science, observation, and the necessary skills to survive.
Before colonization happened, everybody was a good human being. And we're going to work as a community to be the best community that we can be. And then schools and the churches came. And the deficit thinking of good or bad. So that divide started happening. And the expectation changed from always being a good person to now becoming a good or a bad person, a failure. You're not proficient.
The children here are so smart and they're such good kids. And with our family and our culture and our heritage, and they are often involved in much more outside of school.
The next generation thrive in, I guess, is whatever they want. I want to see them have options, whether that looks like subsistence, whether that looks like a job, a degree, some type of knowledge. It's going to be knowledge one way or the another. You have to learn something.
And it's important that we provide all of our kids a path to a way of life that they can use, they can prosper from.
We could certainly prepare the students and the community to be who they want to be, not necessarily leave the community, but to be the best hunter, to be the best provider, to be the best person that they want to be, that they could dream of becoming.
A change has to occur.
People want to be Inupiaq. They want to know their culture.
We need a well-rounded, healthy educational system that treats Alaska Native cultures with respect.